according to Complete College America, when you look at the pipeline, the number's a little scary. And you might want to write these numbers down, because when I saw these, it absolutely scared me to death. 100 students enter the 9th grade. 56 graduate. Of the 56 that graduate, 26 enter the four-year schools. Of the 26 that enters the four-year schools, 19 become sophomores. Of the 19 become sophomores, 6 graduate. 13 of those 56 enter the two-year schools. 6 stay for a second year, and 3 graduate. Now, of 100 students in that pipeline, 6 got a four-year degree, and 3 got a two-year degree. That's the pipeline that scares the businesses. What's really scary about that fact is 2 years ago, it cost the state of Georgia $254 million for students who started 1 year of college and did not come back for the second year. $254 million. That was a $9 billion issue nationally. And so this pipeline, the stats are there. The Complete College America has done that analysis, and it is one that really is important to look at relative to what we have to do.
Dean, let me ask you a question. A lot of the additional post-secondary credentials are going to have to come from two-year colleges, associate degree level, and from technical colleges. Are the issues different for your colleges than others? What are you looking to?
Well, I think the real issue and the real challenge of those students that are coming is, are they prepared? We think one of the top 2 or 3 strategies and challenges is the amount of remediation we're having to do. Give you a couple of numbers. 1 out of every 3 freshmen last year had to have remediation in the university system. 42% of those who entered the technical college system had to have remediation. The numbers show that those students who take 3 remediation classes or more have a 3% graduation rate. Any student who takes remediation has single-digit graduation rates. The real challenge is both for the technical college and the university system is not to become the 13th grade, but in fact to become the place where students move forward, because what happens is they come, they take those classes, as Will was saying, they become discouraged. You know, they've been in school for a year, and then they don't basically complete. So the real challenge we have to do as to partner is to ensure that students understand what it takes to be ready so that they can complete and they are prepared. And it's one that the technical college system is trying its best to work to find a way to make sure that students who come, they're prepared, and we've had great meetings with the superintendent on how we do that. State Superintendent and I have had many conversations with our commissioner about programs and ideas of how do we ensure those students come prepared so that we don't spend precious time and precious money in remediation.
I just want to
let me frame it, because I'm going to ask Lynn and Sam to comment on that, because first point is Georgia is no different from any other state on this. I mean, the fact of the matter is a high school diploma in no state means you're ready for college. You may have taken the right courses, but you don't have the reading, writing, and math skill. Even taking the right courses sometimes doesn't mean that. Georgia actually is a leader in trying to get this kind of connection going, and I know Sam and Lynn want to say something about this. So what, Sam, starting with you, what can K-12 do, PK-12 do about this to make sure that students have the reading, writing, and math skills coming out? And then, Lynn, I'm going to just follow up.
First, absolutely, this has huge implications for public ed and the public education entity. The planning process is of paramount importance. As I think back to firsthand experience from the superintendent's standpoint, I can think of examples of rolling out a strategic process whereby you bring together those stakeholders, much like we've done this morning. We've had the opportunity to do that in my current school system by bringing those stakeholders together that would consist of those business partners, that would consist of those post-secondary institutions, and talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of that school system at that point, and also project out what are those opportunities years ahead of us out there for students, whether it centers on the medical field, the engineering field, the STEM types of influences, etc. So we did that, and what I refer to is a microcosm of the community, the microcosm of your community, to take a look at that from a forecasting standpoint long term, and to develop those strategies as a part of your blueprint locally for each school system. Once that's done, of course, it goes without saying that the Common Core standards, all the performance standards that are already in place, are going to be embraced, but will be taken to a different level. Thus, it allows you to address the early learning piece. And so this is huge. This is not short-term. There are some short-term things that must be done, but it is absolutely long-term, because when you take a look at readiness and you think about early learning, then there are some implications for eliminating the achievement gap early on. And you begin that process prior to even students entering at the pre-K level. So much so that because of the engagement with the microcosm of that community that I mentioned, we knew that we had to have strategies and a blueprint in place to address that, which led to a partnership with United Way Sheltering Arms, so that we could pinpoint those families that we knew we needed to bring in from an early learning standpoint, because the research is clear. When you begin with the early level, the early age, the research is clear. There's a discrepancy between those students in terms of readiness early on at the 3-year-old range as they enter, compared to those students that are not from economically disadvantaged households. So you begin that process early, because their families are good families. I haven't met a family yet that didn't want what was best for their children. But when you look at single-parent households and some of the other challenges that are out there, you're going to have to begin to eliminate that gap early. So by those partnerships and developing those standards and expectations, so once you're able to do that from an early learning standpoint, then you begin to see the gaps close prior to even these students entering at the pre-K, kindergarten level. So that's one facet. Also, once you take a look at elementary, those students must be exposed across the board to rigorous coursework. We talked about access. We talked about no barriers to rigor. That has to begin early on. And then you see it grow and move into middle school, where you have advanced opportunities, honors opportunities. And then it moves into readiness for high school, which then you take into consideration the tenets of SREB, high schools that work, middle schools that work. But the key here is that once you are able to take a look at those items, you're also preparing them from a career readiness standpoint. So you speak of preparing 100% of your students for college, vocational technical aspects, and career readiness, and you do that by measuring it from a work-ready standpoint. So those assessments are already out there. And so what we're doing now is we're beginning to give those assessments to all of the seniors, and when they leave with that in hand, that certification in hand. Also has implications for the career merging in terms of readiness, and we've done that through the academy standpoint. We have a charter public school that we created because of the strategic discussion, so that we can give those skills to those students early on, so they leave high school with industry level certification as they move in. But long response to that, but you have to have those strategies and those standards merged into your blueprint at the local level, so that then it's measurable, and then your stakeholders understand it, and the business partners have said, these are the things that we need, and the skills that we'll mention, those skills will be a part of your curriculum throughout the process. So we know that that's important.
In a couple of minutes, I'd like you to comment a little more about the career tech in high school and how it relates. Lynn?
Well, I get 2 points I'd like to mention. There's been comment made about the Common Core standards, and I think Georgia's really to be commended, because the Georgia performance standards were very, very similar. The correlation between the Georgia performance standards and the Common Core, the alignment was high. And I think it's important, in Georgia's attracted national attention, for the engagement of post-secondary in that work through the Alliance of Education Agency Heads. So the collaboration in Georgia has been extremely important, and one of the favorite stories I like to share about that is we were to give feedback on the Common Core standards, And we called our academic advisory committees, which in mathematics represents a range of faculty from across the system. A call took place 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. We had mathematicians from across the university system looking at K-12 mathematics standards, giving feedback, and one of the men said, I need to look at this a little bit more over the weekend. Give me till noon on Monday. He was one of the lead statisticians from Georgia Tech, spending the weekend going over K-12 standards and providing feedback. So that's the level of engagement that's happening in Georgia that's really important in terms of ensuring that there's alignment across the system. So, and the same thing happened with the technical college system. So those are untold stories that I think are very important and very promising as we move forward. The other piece I'd just like to add is that as Will was making his comments, I think it's important to remember that only about 25% of the current college population represents what in many of us in our mind's eye consider to be traditional college students. The real traditional college student, that other 75%, whether they're 19 or 53, are working jobs, having families, juggling very complex lives. So the reality of the student that enters post-secondary doors is dramatically different than what it was 25 or 30 years ago. So we're all in the process, and the strategies that Will articulated and that SREB has advocated really speak to the changing student population that we seek to serve. And so I think it's important as we think about that, that we keep the student and who those students really are in mind.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you to, then I'm going to ask Chris a question about what specific role that business and industry can play in this. But Lynn, talk to us briefly about the good work George is doing in terms of lining up the standards, particularly the skill standards, reading, writing, and math, between PK-12 and the university system and the technical institutes, and also trying to find an assessment in high school that would focus on these standards, so that students get an early warning.
And Dean, I think, referenced that in your comments earlier. There has been tremendous work in aligning all of this, and actually right now we've both adopted part of the high school graduation test as a proxy for the placement into remediation. So we're piloting in English language arts where that cut score is that would serve as an indicator for readiness into post-secondary without remediation. It's not the same thing as being admitted, but it's a proxy for need for remediation. As we work on even more sophisticated assessments, and George is part of a national consortium really looking at the development of state-of-the-art assessments aligned to the core standards, that I think has a lot of potential for us, because the level of those assessments and the quality of the assessments, just because of the amount of money and research that's being dedicated to that work, holds tremendous promise. So that's a next step that I think we can all look forward to. But the idea, again, is that we're all in agreement for what it takes for success at post-secondary level, and then the high schools are committed to that being the case. And if there is remediation, it would be very slight, or might be with adults returning back, those sorts of things. But we really get this remediation, the need for remediation, down to very, very manageable levels.